a rise and definitely a desire to go even faster on deploying AI agents at scale in healthcare and getting those into healthcare workflows.
AI in general, agents in particular, are going to help in the daily lives of clinicians, doctors, nurses, right? So the workflows that in the future, and probably in the very near future, because this is going so darn fast, right? Those things need to be secured like they're humans.
Security is a clinical requirement, right? It's not a byproduct.
First, an agent has got to be an identity. Like, you have to know that this agent is operating in your environment.
This type of technology is really going to revolutionize how we treat our patients into the future, and doing it with technology that's already in-house. It's going to be a game changer, and I'm thrilled about it.
Welcome back to Access Point. I'm your host, Chip Hughes. What you just heard was the perspective of healthcare leaders about what was top of mind for them at the recent ViVE and HIMSS conferences. And with me, as always, we've got Joel. Joel, how you doing today?
Doing well.
We talked to many different IT, security, and clinical leaders at both shows. And as you heard, they were thinking about cybersecurity, improving operational efficiency. And of course, probably the biggest topic of both shows was artificial intelligence or AI. So what stood out to you? Any big themes that you saw there that you just want to talk about?
Yeah, I think one of the topics, this showed up at ViVE, and I know you have a lot of opinions on it, was really around operationalizing AI. Like, I think we're coming to a point in the hype cycle where it's not just the new shiny toy, and people are trying to figure out how do I make use of this? Like, how do I make actual use of this? And what does that really mean to sort of operationalize it? I think at ViVE, in particular, HIMSS was a little bit different, but at ViVE, it felt like I heard an enormous amount around sort of AI governance and like, what does this really mean to like introduce this into our environments?
Yeah, and I think what you hit on there, I thought it was interesting too. I felt like at ViVE, security was a part of that operational conversation, like you would maybe as security practitioners we would expect. How do we deal with this stuff? And then at HIMSS, I felt like it was much more just about, well, how is AI going to help the healthcare industry? How is it going to help the clinicians? What does that really look like? And the thing that struck me in both cases is I still don't think anybody really has solid answers. And there's sort of two types of people that exist out there. You've got people that are saying things and they say it with a lot of conviction, but when you push a little bit, it's like, yeah, we're figuring it out. Or I think the larger group is almost scared to sort of say anything in some respects, which I think is interesting. And I know, at least for me, I sort of understand what that feels like, because you're entering into these new territory of things where it's like, I think I know what the shape of this looks like based on 20 years in this space, but I'm not 100% sure how this translates to this new thing with all these buzzwords and all this stuff, which has been interesting just to see how people are interacting with vendors, what that looks like, and how they're amassing sort of that knowledge from where I sit.
I agree with you. And I think actually people need to get okay with that feeling a little bit. I mean, a lot of the stuff is so new that even the people that are building it, they're only 4 weeks ahead of the people that are like asking that very same question you're sort of talking about. So like, there is a very real dynamic of a sort of incredible amount of sort of speed of change that is happening around these technologies, which is, I think, feeling a little bit like confusion too amongst the market. It's like, where do I start? What does this really mean? What matters? What has value? Which is, I think, again, why a lot of the conversations turn to like governance. Like, I think a lot of the folks that we talk to, like, okay, what is the framework in which I control this? Or wrap my head around it, which is really nice to do if you haven't already started using or implementing or launching AI initiatives in your organization, which is, account of no one these days. And so, like, a little bit the dynamic, the horse is already out of the gate or whatever. And so governance is not, and we have to do that. But like, I think it feels a little disconnected because there's a lot of talk about that. But, so much of this is already out in the wild.
I think that's right. And I think the thing that I mean, it's at least informing our strategy that I think about a lot is, if that's the case, we used to talk about shadow SaaS and people, these IT leaders, that in different parts of your organization going out and buying these SaaS apps and sort of your central shared service, your CFO, your procurement teams not knowing about it. that's going to happen with AI. And I mean, just in our day in the life here, I know that that's happening with AI. People want to test different stuff. And the big shift now is this idea of outcomes and using agents to get to outcomes. And that's been a fundamental change, right? That we've sort of seen. But it does open up these very, like, how do we operationalize these agents? And how do we try, at least, in my opinion, make sure that, hey, you want to use these agents, it's going to happen. How do we just give you the tooling to go do it so that we at least don't get to a state where we're doing cleanup for the next 20 years? We try to get ahead of this up front. At least that's sort of where my head's at right now.
Yeah. And I think that's a whole mentality and paradigm shift for a lot of folks, right? They're used to, I've programmed my software, I programmed my script to do X, Y, Z. And so this idea that an agent, an AI agent may not do what you tell it to. It may even tell you it did what you asked it to do, and it did something entirely different, right? Is a little bit perplexing, right? And it's not what you're used to when you think about automation frameworks and scripting and software in general, right? The like highly deterministic nature. Then you're thinking, like, I think people, when they think AI, are having a hard time grasping that, like, AI can sort of scheme and, go off the rails a little bit. And so you kind of trust it like a coworker, not a calculator sort of thing is what we say sometimes. But it's, really thinking about then operationalizing of that dynamic, I think is leading a lot of people and us as well to like think of, hey, you have to really treat this, right? You have to deal with this sort of identity lifecycle very differently with AI agents than you do just like software or automation access, and even human access, right? Because it's going to be acting with a lot faster speed and different capabilities than just a human actor would as well.
It's interesting. I don't know if I actually agree with everything you just said. I kind of think in some respects it's all the exact same. It's just that we have to actually do it, for lack of a better way to put it, and maybe. And for those who, you can't see us, I can see Joel, and he sort of shook it, like did a little head bob there, like maybe.
It's a little glasses half full, glasses half empty sort of scenario.
That's right. It opens up these philosophical questions, right? Should every agent have an identity? And, for me, like when someone says that, I kind of roll my eyes, but like now that I'm much more in the thick of it,
and to be clear, you roll your eyes at me all the time.
That's true. That's very true. But, I think when I think about it, it's like, hey, I'm using Claude Code and that's spinning up agents that are sort of embedded. That's a very different thing than I'm using some, agent toolkit that's out there. There's tons of them out there, or like what OpenAI just released to go now actually try to solve some business problem and connect to a bunch of different systems. Right. And in the latter case, like to me, that agent, not that different than what I would have thought of how I would have dealt with non-human identity back in the day. I think I have to have ownership. I think I have to have ephemeral access or that just-in-time access that's appropriate. And I think I've got to make sure whoever owns that agent is also saying, yeah, it's okay to provide that level of access. But the difference is I need to be able to do it quickly. I need to be able to do it dynamically, and I need to make sure I have approvals and stuff like that, I think, in place to sort of solve for that. I don't know where your head goes. But again, an embedded agent, different, much harder to do that, right? So just figuring that out.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair perspective. And I think that is probably leads to more of that sort of discussion and confusion and governance, right? It's like, how do you really characterize that we saw at ViVE and HIMSS. So how do you really characterize these actors, right? We have like well-known patterns for human identity and access, well-known patterns for machine or non-human identity, and sort of where does the sort of AI actor agent identity will sort of land in terms of those sort of control pathways or access patterns.
Yeah. And I think for us too, like where it gets even more interesting when we're talking about healthcare, and we started talking about this with a bunch of different prospects and customers, we're going to use these things to help clinicians as much as possible, right? And for us, especially in the role we play, we talked to Sean, he's been on the podcast. He's an ER doctor. He talks about, I want to use an agent to go refill any prescription requests that I have come in. Well, great, but that is a big regulatory question, right? So how are you going to make sure that you satisfy all of the regulations around prescribed substances, what needs to be done there, and then making sure that Sean's actually getting the benefits out of using an agent to go solve these problems. And ultimately, it's where all of a sudden we've got this new cool way to deal with stuff, really smack dab colliding with the fact that, hey, compliance and regulations don't go away, and we got to go solve for this in a meaningful way. And I think the thing that I think about a lot there is Sean's going to go try to do, well, Sean may not, but I think there will be doctors who will go out there and try to do this because it's going to save them time. And at the end of the day, time is at a premium. And it sort of goes back to the thing that I really took away is if you're a security person, you need to be thinking about getting tools that can get you enabled to get this access at least as good as possible, as quickly as possible. And that was sort of one of the biggest takeaways for me. And I don't know that that's how everyone is really talking about it, right? Like, how can you wire up your agents in a least privilege, but give them the credentials they need without maybe giving them credentials in a full way? And
yeah, I think you're right. I don't think I heard much chatter about the, people talking about how and like what the outcome really looks like. Lots of people are still caught up in the should you use AI for this discussion.
And how do I go discover what's on my network?
Yeah.
And I could be wrong. I think that's important. I think that those things are super important. I don't want to be, but my history on that says that is a never ending project, which by definition, I think is right. And that is really hard to sustain as a high value item. And so if we can get ahead of that by giving the right tools and doing the right change management with our people and getting them through the right security stuff, you can make that project, I think, much more successful up front.
Yeah, I think that's totally true.
It's great. So what else? What else stood out to you that we sort of saw at ViVE and HIMSS in terms of cybersecurity or other pieces?
So this is maybe a controversial perspective, but one of the interesting things, or at least thoughts I had while walking the floor, for those of you who haven't been to the conferences, both of those, there is a whole section for startups, and there's sort of ways to connect with startups, investors with startups, or potential customers for startups, who have a really cool idea that they want to sort of introduce some value into the healthcare tech market. And, sort of piggybacking on this idea of AI, like I wonder, what the future really looks like in those sort of scenarios about introducing innovation into healthcare IT, right? Like you see scenarios like, Fortune 500 companies going, having their evaluation drop because one of the big AI providers, says that they may or may not release a competitive product. And so you see them sort of hurting from this perspective of, the AI disruption. So I do wonder about the dynamics around sort of the lifeblood of innovation that often happens with startups like that, and like what that will look like with AI.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a tough thing. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves because, to your point, in some respects, things that started as sort of startups that often would turn into product features, how long will it take one of the big companies to go develop that product feature, and what does that really look like? And I think we can start to see quite a bit of that. I think the flip of that, at least that I saw, is there are a lot of really cool healthcare related, like startup-y, how do I provide point of care? How do I use these new AI modalities to take not the place of, I want to be careful on how they say that, but go augment your nursing staff so that I don't have to have a nurse present in front of every single bed. There were a couple of different companies that we talked to about what they're doing there. And the new technologies are just absolutely incredible, right? I can remotely monitor if a patient falls, what their blood pressure looks like, whether there's changes in their body temperature, all of those kind of things. And so but it then opens up this set of really interesting, okay, so if I'm doing that, how do I secure all of that? How do I make sure whoever can get access to that is really, really secure? And it was just really interesting to sort of see, I think, how quickly that has evolved as well and a lot of those are startups still, right? They're growing real fast, but they're startups. And so like balancing sort of what you said, it's like, it's hard to be a startup, but also these startups are doing really, really cool stuff that we've never really seen before was one of the really interesting things, at least for me, that I took away. Avatars everywhere, right? Just sort of how it worked.
Yeah, but like to your point though, probably many of these AI startups or the startups that have some really cool technology haven't really figured out how to operationalize their technology at scale, right? The agents really operating, or their technology really operating inside gigantic systems that really impact the sort of patient safety and care of human beings, right? It'll be an interesting way, or interesting to see them mature and evolve into what that ends up looking like, and maybe more established folks like ourselves have to help pull them along.
Well, and I think it's been cliche, right? Like it's not cliche, it's true, but we talk about in some of the different organizations, it's like cybersecurity is patient safety. Well, if all of a sudden I've got an avatar that's administering me drugs based on some LLM or some agent, that agent better not be going rogue. That agent better be right. Like it's just really bringing that first in front, and this need for standards and how we solve a lot of these problems is just patient. It's driving what we get at. And I think the other thing that I thought was interesting, at least for me, was talking to a couple of the CEOs that were at the founders of some of these companies. You know, it really is a startup mentality, right? So you ask some of these questions around, well, how are you securing this? How are you making sure that these type of things can't happen? And I think we need to make sure that those things are really well thought through, and not just, well, we're going to go as fast as we can to sort of get this product out and see what we can do with this product. And we'll catch up on some of this other stuff. That's always been one of these trade-offs with healthcare, is healthcare goes slower, but it goes slower because it equals lives. How is that balance going to sort of adjust as we move forward in this new AI economy where we can build out some of this crazy stuff? It was fascinating to talk to some of them in terms of where they set from that posture perspective.
Yeah, healthcare tends to move at about the speed I like, right? As fast as it's safe.
But that's the right mantra. And
but it is, especially because you think about the sort of stakes that are out there. So I'll ask you, there's a few sort of observations I had. Anything that stand out for you across these two shows? Anything else?
No, I mean, I think we hit on it. I think we need to figure out what we're doing to secure these agents because they're coming. I think that we need to figure out how to infuse this into the innovation market. And I think we need to make sure we're driving innovation. Those are sort of the big things that I took away from it. I will plug Imprivata if I'm allowed to a little bit. I felt really good about all the tech that we had. So if you haven't seen what we're doing, you're probably listening to this because you know of Imprivata or one of us. And so if you haven't seen it, I thought it was a neat show on that perspective. But
I'll say something interesting. So I'm in a group of folks that are really involved in ViVE and Chime, the organization behind ViVE. And they had a little bit of a sentiment that, I'll just pitch your way which it was interesting that there wasn't a lot of new stuff as well across ViVE or HIMSS. It didn't feel like there was high energy around a lot of newness. And like that's an interesting thing to unpack. Like you having been there, like what do you think that they pulled that from? Like what did you see? Is it just because they're overwhelmed probably by AI everything, and so they just walked into an AI show?
Maybe it could be. I don't. It's an interesting question. I don't know. I felt ViVE and HIMSS were very different, and it's almost the difference of a HIMSS. When I walk around HIMSS, is all. It's like the. Even though it was in Vegas, it's like Vegas. It's lots of lights and it's very showy and it's glitzy and glammy. But I guess I don't think we're still figuring out what's the novel thing that this is going to mean, right? Like we kind of went through this phase of like, hey, ambient listening is like the big deal and we're going to go do that. Okay.
Yeah, it dominated last year, right? That was like the only thing anybody ever talked about.
It's all anyone talked about. And I feel like every hospital has started doing it. And And so you walk into a hospital, they've done it. I feel like these smart rooms are catching fire, and there's a few vendors out there that are looking at them. And when we talk to them about hospital of the future or where they're going, they're really thinking about what they're doing on that front. But it hasn't seemed to catch the same way as some of these other technologies. And so I don't think you walked out of any of these sessions and went, oh, that's the thing that everybody's doing right now that I think is new and interesting. And so I think that sort of led to feeling like there wasn't necessarily a lot of real innovation. I think the other thing is, in some respects, I can say this on a podcast. It just feels like a lot of vendors in some respects too, and so I think that gets a little overwhelming. It feels like that things are getting more and more full with vendors around this, which I don't know why, but I've gone to a few of these, and I think that you can take that and sort of walk away and go, "Ooh, it feels like a lot of people." And we're a big sponsor of ViVE at a minimum, and very involved with Chime, so I don't want to take away from anything those guys are doing, but it is a big trade show now. So it just sort of is.
Yeah. Like some of that is just the things changing, right? And the like no longer being a small, intimate, gathering of, healthcare technology nerds.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right. But yeah, I don't know. So I don't know if there's anything else we really need to necessarily hit on. What I'm really excited about, I think, this agentic stuff. So first off, we're going to do a podcast on agentic. You and I have talked about this. We're going to bring in one of our guys that is sort of our research,
lives and breathes this.
Loves this stuff. And he does a really good job of explaining sort of what these things mean. Because conceptually, sometimes I feel like we talk and people just are like, what are they talking about? But I think the thing that I'm excited to see is how this agentic stuff does translate into actual clinical workflow usage and what that can look like. And talking to some of the big EMR vendors, they're doing this. We're seeing it. It's just new and they're still building it. And when we ask some of the questions around it, it's like, yes, we want to do that. And we know that that's important, but we got to finish building our agent framework or whatever it is before we even start with that. And so I also think we're sort of in that waiting period where there's all this hype, but we got to get this stuff out and then we'll figure out how to go solve for it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's a little bit where we are, is that like the excitement and novelty of the new technology has sort of worn off and people are looking for now, how is this useful? But it turns out no matter how awesome AI is, right? Like it takes a while to, build something that's really actually, broadly useful for an industry. And so we're at that like post, I don't want to say delusion. What is it? Delusion. No.
Yeah, I forget the terms, but it's like
the trough of whatever.
Audio only, because I'm doing all these arm motions and that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the trough of disillusionment. But like there is an element of that, right? Like the hype and the excitingness of the novelty is sort of worn. There's still, like I said, I feel like a bit of confusion. So it would be great to have Preston on the show, right? Because I think I still had discussions about what is an agent, at both ViVE and HIMSS with some of these customers. It's like, what is it really? Like what are we really talking about when we talk about agents?
And I think, maybe that's the actual closing point. Is the other thing that I would just say that stood out to me is every vendor, including us, is talking about AI. We had a press release around AI. We had, I don't remember how many people we had come by our booth at HIMSS, but I mean, hundreds of different customers come by our booth at HIMSS, and none of them, that's not true, but very few of them were actually really asking us about AI. What they really wanted to know was, what have we developed that continues to sort of drive efficiency for clinical users and clinical access?
Yeah, they don't care about the AI. They care about the value that gets delivered. That's
right. And they care about their clinicians and they care about that fast access. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that I sort of took from that is like, you just have to pause, because you and I in our organization right now are figuring out what it means to develop software using these new tools, these new paradigms, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, our mission is still to make sure that we give that clinician as quick of access as possible, whether that's on a desktop or on a mobile phone. And when they come by our booth, they don't really care. Nobody cares if it's AI under the covers or an agent or how we're doing that. What they care about is how are you giving that access? And, so this, as a vendor, this balancing act now of, hey, we need to focus on our core value prop, which is this, but also we're now extending what we're doing to solve this agentic problem so that you don't have a bigger problem in 3 years becomes a really interesting sort of problem to solve that we're going to continue to have to sort of go take to market and figure out how we're going to solve for it, because I think that's where we actually are. And
so in some way, right, like nothing has changed, right? Like outcomes are what matters. So like maybe the final takeaway is like, this is all cool and fun and shiny, but guess what? Nothing's really changed. Outcomes matter.
That's right. I think that's right. And I think that was the bigger piece sort of across the board is how are you helping me solve this specific problem? And the challenges that come up with agents are the same types of challenges that we have sort of in different product sets, and let's just figure out how to solve them. So, all right. Anything else you want to hit on?
No, that was great.
Yep.
Thank you for the conversation.
It's always fun. And reach out to us, download, like, subscribe, and we hope to be hearing from y'all and be on another one of these soon. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and follow Access Point on your favorite podcast platform. We also welcome your feedback. Please send us any thoughts, insights, or suggestions to accesspointpodcast@imprivata.com or find us on LinkedIn. Until next time, I'm Chip and he's Joel. This has been Access Point.